The rest of the continent did appear to be predominantly some form of grassland, heath, or scrub, with very few plants growing to a height greater than 5 meters tall. Largest animal life forms that could be detected appeared to be not much larger than a jackal or a badger. The animals were roaming in small groups or as isolated individuals. There are other animals smaller than these out there, though anything smaller than a rabbit wouldn't register from this altitude. Though the animals were present through virtually all the various terrains on the continent, there didn't appear to be any that were venturing onto the settlers' farmland. The landscape itself showed signs of regular and predictable weather patterns, the terrain not exhibiting any of the obvious examples of high winds, flash floods, or prolonged drought. It certainly did appear to be a benign area to set up a colony. Hope did appear to have almost ideal surface habitat for the inhabitants of Mars. That was, of course, if the current inhabitants could cope with the new arrivals. Having gathered as much information as possible, Gaia then dispatched his last message directly from Ogia back to Mars with his full assessment of the situation, his intention to make contact with the aliens on the surface. He then completed the stocking of Calypso and decided against taking any form of weapon to the surface. The weapons on board Ogia had been designed for the use against possible hostile wildlife, and the species on the surface appeared to be no significant threat to him. If the people on the surface turned out to be hostile, then with the numbers involved, no amount of weaponry would save him, and would only cause problems for future contacts with later settlements from Mars. Gaia, indeed, did have a deep-seated objection to violence in all its forms. He had trained in martial arts as a defense technique and as a form of calisthenics rather than an outlet for aggression. He never liked the idea of killing things or using a gun of any kind. The only additional equipment which he added to his list of existing stores on board Calypso were more tools, solar panels, and all the medical supplies. Gaia now checked the reports, scanning them for what he hoped would be a good landing site about 20 kilometers outside the furthest westward expansion of the settlement. Such a distance would put him far enough away from the settlement to avoid contact on the ground, yet he could easily reach them the following morning after landfall. There appeared to be just such a landing site on a sandy, elevated feature some 24 kilometers from the outermost edge of the settlement. Having made up his mind where to land, Gaia boarded Calypso and carefully began the sequence for launching Calypso from the hold of Ogia. Once launched, he would then pilot it into a shallow orbit around Hope, to be followed by a swift journey down to Landfall. Gaia had to be very careful with such a launch sequence. It's probably the most dangerous part of the mission. Whilst he was in Calypso, he could still communicate and control most aspects of Ogia's operation, but Calypso was itself a much smaller and less robust craft than Ogia. Calypso had one major purpose, and that was to ferry its cargo from orbit down to Hope in one piece. It wasn't a fancy ship, it was a small and practically, once on the surface, would be his last refuge in case of trouble. Gaia, of course, had been trained in survival techniques, but the simulations would never match the real thing. And Gaia, like all the inhabitants of Mars, had grown up surrounded by machines and technology. Now was coming the time to put all the theory he'd learnt to the test.